When I fasted for the first time as a new Muslim, I had no idea how much it would change me. I knew it was a religious obligation, something Muslims do around the world, but I didn't realize it would impact not just my body but my mind, my heart, and my soul. I started the fast with a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and curiosity. I wondered if I could actually do it, if I would be patient, if I would stay disciplined, if I would feel hunger too strongly, if I would get tired or frustrated, if I would break it too early. But I reminded myself that fasting is not just about abstaining from food and drink. It is a spiritual practice, a mental discipline, a daily opportunity to grow, to reflect, to strengthen faith, and to learn self-control. I remember the first morning before sahur, preparing my meal, feeling the anticipation, feeling the quiet in the early hours, feeling a sense of connection even before the fast began. I reflected on intention. I reminded myself that this is for Allah, for my growth, for my faith, for my commitment, and for my own discipline. I took deep breaths. I made dua quietly in my heart, asking for patience, strength, guidance, and consistency. I started the fast. I noticed hunger almost immediately in the first few hours. I felt my body adjusting. I felt my mind focused. I realized that fasting forces mindfulness. I had to plan my day, my energy, my meals, my activities. I noticed small things more clearly: the smell of food, the sounds around me, the people interacting with me. I realized that fasting brings awareness. I began to notice my thoughts. I began to notice my emotions. I began to notice impulses. I realized that fasting teaches self-control, not just over food, but over speech, over temper, over habits. I felt cravings arise. I felt tiredness. I felt moments of impatience and irritation. But I remembered the purpose of fasting. I reminded myself that the struggle is part of growth. I reminded myself that every small act of restraint is rewarded. I discovered that fasting is a mirror. It reflects who I am, my strengths, my weaknesses, my character, my patience, my gratitude. I realized that when I resist temptation, I build discipline. I realized that when I control impulses, I strengthen my character. I realized that fasting is an exercise in emotional intelligence. I realized that it teaches empathy. I began to feel compassion for those who are less fortunate, for those who struggle to find food, for those who are hungry daily. I felt gratitude in every bite at iftar. I felt appreciation for water, for meals, for family, for health. I realized that fasting teaches gratitude on a deep level. I started noticing my mental clarity growing. I realized that hunger opens doors to reflection, meditation, and spiritual awareness. I spent time in prayer, in reflection, in reading Quran. I realized that fasting enhances my connection with Allah. I realized that it teaches reliance on Him. I realized that fasting is not punishment but opportunity. I discovered that my mindset changed gradually with each day. I noticed patience growing in daily interactions. I noticed calmer reactions to frustration. I noticed that small inconveniences felt lighter. I realized that fasting builds resilience, emotional control, and mental toughness. I realized that fasting also brings humility. I noticed how dependent I am on food, water, comfort, and material things. I realized that simplicity and abstinence create space for reflection, spiritual growth, and focus. I discovered that my mind became sharper, my priorities clearer, my heart calmer, and my intentions purer. I began to plan my day mindfully, balancing school, prayers, chores, and rest. I realized that fasting teaches time management, discipline, and organization. I discovered that even small acts of worship and good deeds during fasting carry more weight. I noticed that helping others, giving charity, being kind, and controlling anger felt more meaningful. I realized that fasting is a holistic practice. It nurtures body, mind, and soul. I realized that it shapes habits, routines, and priorities. I realized that it builds resilience against stress, frustration, and distraction. I discovered that with each day, I became more self-aware. I reflected on how I react under hunger, pressure, or difficulty. I reflected on patience, gratitude, and empathy. I reflected on my goals, my intentions, and my spiritual growth. I realized that fasting brings awareness to everything I do. I realized that it connects my inner self with outer actions. I realized that it strengthens willpower, mindfulness, and discipline. I discovered that fasting is a daily reset, a chance to realign with my faith, to check intentions, to cultivate inner strength. I noticed that the more I fasted, the more disciplined I became. I noticed that my emotional responses became calmer. I noticed that my patience, self-control, and gratitude grew. I noticed that my awareness of Allah, of purpose, of morality, of character deepened. I realized that fasting changes mindset because it trains the heart, mind, and soul simultaneously. I realized that every hunger pang is a reminder of patience, every moment of restraint is a lesson in self-control, every prayer is a connection with Allah, every act of kindness is amplified. I discovered that fasting enhances emotional intelligence, awareness, empathy, humility, gratitude, and spiritual focus. I noticed that my worldview began to shift. I understood the struggles of others more deeply. I became more compassionate, more considerate, more reflective, more purposeful. I realized that fasting is not a temporary challenge. It is a lifelong teacher. It instills habits, discipline, mindfulness, patience, empathy, gratitude, and inner strength. I realized that by completing fasting days, I built not only endurance for hunger but endurance for life. I realized that fasting changes mindset because it teaches that self-control is power, reflection is growth, and connection with Allah is essential. I realized that fasting is a complete spiritual, emotional, and mental journey. I noticed my confidence growing. I noticed my priorities becoming clearer. I noticed my appreciation for simple things increasing. I discovered that fasting teaches resilience, balance, humility, gratitude, self-discipline, spiritual awareness, empathy, patience, and mindfulness. I realized that the more I fast, the more I reflect, the more I learn, the more I grow. I discovered that the impact of fasting extends beyond Ramadan. It shapes daily decisions, interactions, intentions, and mindset. I realized that fasting is a powerful tool for transforming thoughts, emotions, habits, and character. I noticed the holistic change in body, mind, and spirit. I discovered a connection with Allah I had never felt before. I discovered peace in restraint, clarity in simplicity, gratitude in scarcity, and strength in discipline. I realized that fasting is a teacher that never leaves, a guide that always grows, a mentor that cultivates patience, gratitude, resilience, empathy, humility, focus, awareness, and spiritual connection. I realized that my mindset changed completely through fasting. I realized that I became calmer, more patient, more grateful, more focused, more self-aware, more connected, more empathetic, more disciplined, more reflective, and more spiritually grounded. I realized that the lessons of fasting are endless, and each day, each hour, each moment brings new awareness, growth, and connection with Allah. I want every new Muslim watching this to know that fasting is a gift, a journey, a teacher, and a transformation. It is not just about abstaining from food. It is about reshaping your mind, heart, and soul. It is about self-discipline, empathy, gratitude, patience, resilience, and spiritual awareness. It is about connecting deeply with Allah and understanding the value of life, compassion, and purpose. It is a journey that grows with each day, teaches lessons that last a lifetime, and transforms mindset in ways that are profound, emotional, and everlasting.